Thank you for joining us for another episode of I'll Allow It Nevada, your trusted podcast for insightful glimpses into Nevada's judicial education. I'm Anne-Marie Mayu, your host.
And I'm Seth Beasley, serving as your co-host today.
We proudly represent the Supreme Court of Nevada, AOC Judicial Branch Training Unit. So, Seth, Nevada is renowned worldwide for its gaming entertainment, and along with this stellar reputation, we have some stringent guardrails in place to maintain the integrity of the industry. So in this episode, we'll be learning about the Nevada Gaming Control Board. Seth, please introduce our esteemed guest.
Absolutely. With us today, we have Kirk Hendrick. He is chairman of the Nevada Gaming Control Board. Kirk, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So we'll just jump right in. Can you give us a brief overview of the Nevada Gaming Control Board as well as the board's primary responsibilities?
Absolutely. The Nevada Game Control Board, which is customarily referred to as the board, or sometimes the NGCB, was created back in 1955, almost 70 years ago. Wow. The board consists of 3 full-time state government employees appointed by the governor for 4-year terms. The governor also selects one of the 3 members to be the chair and executive director of the board. Governor Joe Lombardo appointed me to the board and as chair back in January of last year. Also on the board with me, my fellow board members are Dr. Brittany Watkins and George Assad, who is a former City of Las Vegas Municipal Court judge. The board has approximately 400 agents and employees located in offices throughout Nevada in Carson City, Las Vegas, Reno, Elko, and Laughlin. The easiest way to answer your question about what is the primary responsibilities of the board is probably to look at the board's mission statement. And that, to paraphrase it a little bit, is the board is charged with protecting the integrity and stability of Nevada's gaming industry through in-depth investigative procedures, exacting licensing practices, strict enforcement of laws and regulations, holding licensees to high standards. By following those practices, the board ensures proper collection of taxes and fees, which are an essential source of revenue for Nevada. That's a little bit about the board. Nevada has a 2-tiered gaming regulatory system. The board is the day-to-day operating agency, and the Nevada Gaming Commission is the final say for licensing and regulations. The commission's comprised of 5 part-time members of the community. And to my knowledge right now, interestingly enough, we probably have more former judges on the board and commission than we've ever had in Nevada's regulatory history. Out of the 5 commissioners and the 3 board members, 3 of them are former judges. Gaming Commission Chair Jennifer Tagliotti was a justice of the peace, acting federal magistrate, and a district court judge for many years. Justice Abby Silver, who was the first person in Nevada to be elected to every court in the state's court system, was recently appointed to the commission. And George Assad, as I mentioned, was a former municipal court judge. So 3 out of 8 is extremely impressive. A little bit more about the board and the process. The board and commission conduct monthly meetings at least once a month and then special meetings as required. As I said, essentially the board and its agents are the day-to-day agency for Nevada's gaming regulation, while the commission has final approval over licensing matters and regulations and will sit in a quasi-judicial role when deciding disciplinary matters against licensees.
Wow, that's great. So the judges' names that you just spoke of are very familiar to me. So that's exciting. And of course, we always get word when they are on different boards and commissions. So it's good to know we have our common judiciary involved in that.
Yeah, it's very, very impressive.
Yeah, it really is, as it should be, because it's an important piece of Nevada that needs to be monitored. So now you had said the commission really are the ones who review and approve the gaming license. Could you share with us, though, the key steps involved in investigating a potential gaming license and what criteria is considered when granting a gaming license?
Yes, and there's a lot to that question. Let's start with the 2 primary types of gaming licenses in Nevada. The first is a non-restricted license, which would be for the operation of 16 or more slot machines, or for any number of slot machines together with any other gaming device or race book and sports pool at one establishment. A non-restricted license is also issued to slot route operators. And one way to tell if somebody knows about Nevada's gaming regulatory system is if they use the word non-restricted and restricted. If they say unrestricted, they probably don't really know the system. So the word is non-restricted for the major places that you see around the state. The other type of license is a restricted license, and that's for the operation of not more than 15 slot machines and no other games or gaming devices. Most commonly, that would be for places like bars and taverns, or restricted licenses are also issued for places like convenience stores and liquor stores. So to your question about how does the investigation work, it wouldn't be surprising to know that a non-restricted licensee would go through a much more in-depth review than someone applying for a restricted license where they would only have 15 or fewer slot machines. And when I say slot machines, by statute, that term includes devices such as video poker machines. So it includes all of those. Okay. So to the steps, and I'll try to summarize these without getting too deep into the weeds, but how the process works is an applicant would file a complete application. And that's important because a lot of times we get applications that aren't complete. And so what we do then is our applicant services division works with the applicant and their experienced gaming counsel to be sure that everything is complete. That application process is very extensive. Let's take, for example, someone who wanted to be an officer or director at a major casino in Las Vegas or, say, Reno. That person would need to file a Form 1, which is an individual application, a Form 7, which is a multi-jurisdictional personal history disclosure. And that sounds about as long as it is. We're talking probably 70 pages long that goes into every piece of your personal background. Nevada then has a Form 7A, which is called the Nevada Supplemental Personal History. So more information that Nevada wants besides the multi-jurisdictional. And then they have to also fill out and submit a affidavit of full disclosure that says that they swear that everything's true and complete, a release of all indemnity and claims for the board's investigation, a request to release information so that our agents can show that around to agencies and other governmental entities around the world. They then have to fill out either electronic fingerprints or 3 FBI fingerprint cards if the prints are going to be taken outside of Nevada. And then finally, they have to fill out a fingerprint background waiver card. All of that, once that's done and completed, I'll go through the steps that then happen. That's what they have to submit. Wow. The case gets assigned to a team of investigation agents. Those agents review the matter. They'll create a work plan. They'll develop a budget, which the applicant is responsible for paying for. And those investigations can be tens of thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the number of entities involved, the number of applicants involved, where those people have lived, worked, done business, etc. The agents then start with a document request that includes background information, financial documents, tax records, business records. An initial interview is then conducted, and then the agents start their background work. That includes some work inside the office, and then depending on if it is a non-restricted licensee who's been involved in businesses or gone to college or lived in states and countries around the world, our agents from Nevada will literally travel to everywhere they've ever been and ask questions. They will go into police stations. They will go into courts. They will go into law enforcement. They'll go into recorders' offices. If there's land issues, they'll go into government and private entities. They'll conduct a very thorough financial analysis that looks at all of the documents that were submitted, as well as documents that may have been in locations where they've done business. A little bit separate is if the application involves a new gaming property, then they would, of course, look at the business records. They'll look at business formation records, source of funds, pre-opening cash, bankroll, financial projections. And then they'll do a confidential comparison to other non-restricted locations that would be in the same geographical area in the state. Similarly, if it was a merger and acquisition, the agents will perform a detailed review of the proposed transaction, the entity formation documents, debt analysis, ratio analysis. Once all that's done, a report gets done that gets submitted up the chain of command in the investigations division. Finally, it lands on the desks of the 3 Gaming Control Board members who review it before a public meeting is held. And then the applicants appear in Nevada and come from all over the world. Just this last month, we had people from Japan and Europe and Canada, and then, of course, all across the United States. They come before the Gaming Control Board and answer any questions there may be. Approximately 2 weeks after that, if the board recommends the application for approval to the commission, the commission will meet, and then they will have, as we talked about earlier, they will have final say-so on whether or not a license gets issued to the individuals and whether or not they're found suitable to hold the positions and whether or not the entity is licensed to conduct gaming in Nevada. So that's a mouthful. It sounds like a lot. And it is. It's a lot on purpose because Nevada's licensing process is one of the most thorough reviews that anyone ever goes through. We have applicants, as I said, who appear from around the world before the board, and many of them are licensed in quite a few other states and countries around the world. I like to ask them, how did you like the Nevada licensing experience? How did it treat you? And many of them use words like, it was robust, it was thorough, or it was enlightening, sometimes they will say, but it is extremely, extremely intensive, and that's because we want to keep good people in Nevada gaming industry.
I was going to use the word rigorous.
Oh, rigorous. Yeah. That's probably a word too. You also ask about the criteria, and I'll go through that in less detail. But the main consideration is that gaming is a privilege. No one's entitled to hold a gaming license in Nevada. So gaming regulation has been founded on the principle that only good, honest people and entities should be allowed to participate in our state's gaming industry. In order to determine those qualifications, factors include things like were they accurate and timely in all of their information responses that the board asked for? Did they provide full disclosure? Were they honest? Was there integrity? Yeah, how was their criminal background? What's their litigation background? What's their business probity? Is there a valid source of funds? How does the applicant comply with laws and regulations in other jurisdictions where they've been licensed? And is there an adequate and legitimate source of funds if there was a new operation or purchase? So we're looking at them as a person, and we're looking at them from business probity, and we're looking for, is this going to be a sustainable business? We're talking about one of the major industries that drives the Nevada economy. We're talking about thousands and thousands of jobs. We've got to be sure that the people who hold these licenses are going to be good for Nevada, good for our economy, and of course provide fair opportunities and fair gaming for our visitors and our residents.
And that makes all the sense, because normally you wouldn't think about the process of that, of the trying to get a license, but it makes complete sense. It would be that intense. So that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a vital, a vital industry for our state. Yeah, many people in our state, they rely on that. Either they work for it or they, as we'll get into this, you mentioned this earlier, Kirk, that a lot of the state's revenue comes from the casinos as well, the gaming industry, I should say. So real fast, what are some common challenges the board faces during the licensing process?
I would say, kind of as I mentioned earlier, is the board getting an accurate and complete application? And complete is important because a lot of times applicants, especially if they're not used to the Nevada process, they will say, oh, I got my application in on June 1st. Well, you submitted an application, but you'll be working with applicant services now to fill in the blanks you haven't done. So that's important. And then things like accurate responses to information requests, timely responses, so that everybody wants their application to be moved through the system as soon as possible. The quicker we can get answers back to our questions, the faster we can move. Other things would be like obtaining access to law enforcement information, especially in foreign countries. Sometimes that can be challenging. As you know, some other countries have privacy laws. And so we have to be sure that our releases and our information requests is all saying that the applicant has a burden to be sure that we can get that information. So at the end, it's time constraints of getting everything done in a timely manner, especially for time-sensitive applications. For instance, if we have a hotel, a major new hotel being built in the state, and they have a planned opening on a certain date, there's a lot of board work from many divisions that must be done in a short amount of time. And then on a side note, one of our challenges in being sure the licensing process is done is recruiting and retaining qualified investigators to do all this work, to travel all around the world, and to be sure that they can take on a case and understand everything they have to look for to be sure that this person is suitable to be involved in the Nevada gaming industry.
How long does it normally take to get a license approved?
It all depends on whether or not it's a new entity with new people inside or outside of Nevada. The more ties you have to Nevada and the more licensing you've gone through in Nevada and potentially in other places, the process speeds up. If it's a new entity with hardly any ties to Nevada, that can take anywhere from 12 to 16 months. Wow. If somebody is already licensed in Nevada, already has properties, the officers and directors have already been licensed or found suitable in Nevada, that process moves faster. But still, on these non-restricted location applications, you're looking at anywhere from 9 to 12 months. And that's because, as I said earlier, we've got to look at every piece of this documentation, and we have to go around the world and around the United States to investigate where they've lived, where they went to college, where they've done business, who their family members are, what their associations are. And a lot of that just takes time. And dealing with other governmental agencies around the world, sometimes we're waiting on them to get us back information.
Sure.
While we pause for a quick break, I'd like to extend a special invitation to our listeners. I'll Allow It Nevada goes beyond just being a certified legal education podcast. It's designed to be inclusive, welcoming all who are interested. We aim to build connections within our communities and provide valuable insights into the Nevada judiciary. If you've enjoyed our episodes, we encourage you to spread the word and share this experience with your friends and family. Your support is greatly appreciated.
So when it comes to enforcing gaming laws and regulations, can you share with us what the top priorities are?
Yes, the board's top priority in enforcing Nevada's gaming laws and regulations would be to make sure that everything is fair across the board. That would be enforcement must be fair for the patrons, must be fair for the licensees, must be fair for the state. Included with that fairness to the state is the requirement that the gaming operators pay their appropriate taxes. At the end of the day, the Nevada Game Control Board is a tax collection agency, and Nevada has a well-earned reputation for providing fair gaming for both the patrons and the operators, and that's something we want to strive to uphold that reputation. And then in turn, we will continue to have people who want to come to Nevada, want to be involved in the entertainment and gaming in Nevada, which creates a lot of tax revenue that makes Nevada such a great place to live.
Yeah, it sure does.
So, have there been any interesting or relevant changes in gaming regulations that our audience should be aware of?
We've had a lot of recent revisions and updates to the Nevada Gaming Commission regulations, and we've spent a considerable amount of time over the past year and a half that I've been here cleaning up old and getting rid of outdated commission regulations. I wouldn't say that any of those in particular relate to the judicial branch necessarily, but I would say that the primary focus has been on removing redundant, duplicative, or unnecessary regulations, and on passing new regulations that will streamline Nevada's process. For example, Governor Lombardo, in his State of the State address, challenged the Gaming Control Board to maintain strict regulation, but also to ensure that new gaming technology and equipment can get onto casino floors more rapidly. And following up on his challenge, the board passed several new regulations that included things like approval categories for equipment and systems to speed up that process, eliminating certain field tests that must be done on gaming devices that have to be tested out on a real gaming floor, allowing the board to handle certain aspects of those field tests to speed up the review process. And then we recently just issued in the last week or so timelines that will keep the Game Control Board's lab and the applicant licensees, manufacturers and distributors primarily, on a specific laid out timelines so that we know when deadlines are due and they know when deadlines are due. A lot of that probably will not end up in the courts, but it's good for Nevada, and it's good for the industry, and it's good for regulation. Efficient and effective regulation is more important than just having red tape. I'm a big fan of eliminating red tape whenever possible.
Well, and with technology continuing to grow, it seems like by the second, right, and change, there's all sorts of tools out there that can help us to kind of get rid of some of that red tape and move on to newer procedures.
Absolutely.
So how does the board handle violations of gaming regulations?
Well, there's several types. So you have minor violations that would be handled by the divisions, more what I would call foot faults. Those are on a daily basis in any regulated environment. And then you have the regulation violations that are more of a significant nature. While rare, they do happen. And again, they're rare because of the concept I mentioned earlier about if we only let in good, honest people and companies inside of the gaming industry, and we make those people, once they get inside the gate, and require them to have a responsibility to self-report any known violations, major violations don't usually occur. When they do occur, or there's one suspected by the board's division, a report will be drafted for the board members' consideration. Oftentimes, the board sends out what's called an order to show cause, and that demands that the licensee address the board's concerns in writing, explain what occurred, and include any remedial measures or mitigating circumstances in their response. Many times, the licensee's response for that will be deemed acceptable to the board, and the matter will be closed. For historical purposes, though, it will be kept on file. So if there's a similar violation in the future, the board can say, remember, we talked about this a few years ago, and you told us it wouldn't happen again. When a matter, though, becomes very significant, or when the board does not agree with the licensee's response to an order to show cause, the board will file a formal disciplinary complaint with the Gaming Commission. And that will charge the licensee with violations of the Game Control Act and or the Commission's regulations. Once a complaint is filed, there's a quasi-judicial process with potential motions, briefs, et cetera, that are permitted according to procedural due process rights. And if it proceeds, it will ultimately end up in a potential public hearing before the commission. That hasn't happened very often in the last few years. A lot of times the licensees understand that what they've done is they've stepped out, and a lot of times not intentionally, but they've stepped outside the lines to a significance where they will need to pay a fine. Other options for the commission to consider is conditioning or limiting the individual or the entity's license, all the way up to surrender of their license or even revocation, which is extremely harsh. It's been many, many years since we've had a casino in Nevada have a true license revoked. And so hopefully we don't get to that level because you're talking about jobs at stake and a lot of people's livelihood. So it's rare that would happen.
That's really good. Is there one particular violation that you see like consistently where you're like, oh yeah, we see this one all the time?
Yeah, there is. It happens a lot in estate planning. It happens a lot in sales, and it's not significant at the top to the point where you're talking about revoking someone's license. But it's let's say a seller which has a gaming license wants to sell their gaming entity to a buyer, and what will happen is if they don't have experienced gaming counsel, they will not escrow the money. They will allow a down payment to be paid over to the licensee before the Gaming Commission has approved that process. And so then what you have is you have a non-licensed entity buyer that has a hook into a licensed establishment, and it's just clear by statute. You can't do that. Usually now most people are pretty smart on getting a hold of gaming counsel and saying, I want to do this deal. I'm going to either the seller or the buyer. Somebody ends up and says, whoa, wait a minute. We can't pass that money over. Let's be sure that the contracts are done right. And then, as I mentioned, in estate planning, a lot of times somebody will not get a gaming trust in place or not get all their estate documents in place, and there will be somebody will pass away, unfortunately, and there will be a non-licensed individual in there. These situations, of course, we want a new buyer in there, and we want them to go through the licensing process. So it ends up a lot of times being a small fine, but they do have to appear in front of the commission in a public meeting and do some apologies and explanations. So it's never a good process, but that one we see to your question, on a pretty regular basis.
Right, that makes sense.
So how does the board ensure accurate collection of gaming taxes and fees?
Yeah, that's a good question. As I mentioned earlier, at the end of the day, the Game Control Board is a tax collection agency. So the board utilizes an online portal to notify licensees what their taxes and fees are and when they're due. The licensees use that online portal then to submit forms and payments corresponding to the different taxes and fees that they owe. Once those forms are submitted to the board, the board's audit division and tax and license divisions audit the forms and the payments, and the companies actually every 3 years approximately to ensure accuracy. And that's broken down into two sets. So the audit division will perform the audits for what's called Group 1 non-restricted licensees, and the board's tax and license division will perform revenue reviews on Group 2 non-restricted licensees. And the difference between those two is there's a threshold set every year on how much money in gross gaming revenue should determine whether or not you're a Group 1 or Group 2 licensee. The Group 1s obviously are your major casinos, and then you have some smaller locations, certainly out in the rural communities, that have less gross gaming revenue. So their review and their audits aren't as robust as a non-restricted Group 1 licensee. And similar to audits of any business, there are minor and major issues that may be addressed. The minor issues are handled on a daily basis around here, a weekly basis, where, okay, you should have done this, but you did that. That's okay. You're on notice. And then the more significant ones, after a thorough, we're talking about an on-property audit. Sometimes our agents will go out and be on property for several weeks and go through an extensive audit. Those can involve more in-depth review and how much tax may have not been collected. Because at the end of the day, our goal is to be sure that we collect the appropriate amount of tax for the taxpayers of Nevada and for the licensees of Nevada.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on the significance of the gaming taxes and fees to Nevada's overall state revenue? Like, it's a big chunk of money, right?
Yes, certainly. And the board, as we talked about earlier, has several primary functions: ensuring the fairness of the games that we discussed earlier, enforcing laws and regulations to prevent things like cheating, and then being a tax collection agency. As you mentioned, tax and fees collected by the Game Control Board is a significant source of revenue for our state. The last fiscal year, I actually wrote this down, the last data we have is for fiscal year 23. And the board's total general fund collections were $1.136 billion, an amount that accounted for roughly 20% of Nevada's total general fund collections. And out of that, the largest component of the board's collections come from percentage fees on gross revenue, which are based on the non-restricted licensee's taxable gross gaming win. In fiscal year 23, the board collected $970 million in percentage fees, which accounted for approximately 85% of the board's total collection. And so when we talk about percentage fees, that's this percentage that non-restricted licensees will pay. Right now, 6 3/4 is the height of the gross gaming revenue tax. And that, as you can see, is a significant amount if it's 20% of Nevada's total general fund collection.
Well, yeah, that is an impressive amount. I knew it was a lot, but I mean, so what measures does the Gaming Control Board take to maintain and enhance public confidence in the gaming industry?
I'd say there's multiple ways the board ensures public confidence. You have things like we discussed where the investigations process ensures that by thoroughly vetting individuals and companies involved in Nevada's gaming industry, that the Investigation and regulations are applied evenly across the industry. Tourists and residents can be assured that they are participating in a fair and legal gaming environment. That also assures that all operators in Nevada's gaming economy are playing on a level playing field. Similarly, the enforcement standpoint, the board focuses on maintaining industry stability, enforcing regulations, safeguarding public trust in gaming, as well as overall public safety for our residents and our visitors. By having strict enforcement of the laws and regulations, that ensures that licensees adhere to the high standards that Nevada requires and that they operate transparently. That openness and being sure that there's a transparency, that's a key component. For example, you may have seen a sign outside of a location like a bar that has a sign that says, "We have a cover charge, but for anybody who wants to come in and just play the machines, if they just want to be involved in gaming, they don't have to pay the cover charge." And that's to ensure that gaming is open and honest and not done in shady back rooms. And then I guess finally, from a public confidence standpoint and audit and tax perspective, as we discussed, gaming licensees are expected to pay their appropriate taxes and fees. And by having periodic audits, that ensures that everything's done properly and the correct amount of tax is collected. One more, I guess, from the standpoint of technology we talked about earlier, I would say patron protection is extremely important to provide public confidence, and that includes things like making sure the game is fair and that the patron, of course, is paid correctly, and making sure that the gaming licensees have proper reserve requirements so that funds are available to pay all winnings. Years ago, that didn't happen. Sometimes somebody would win a big jackpot, and we're talking decades ago. There just wasn't enough money available inside the casino. So now casinos have to be sure they have reserve requirements available to pay all winnings, and that goes directly to public confidence in the game. And then, as we talked about, accountability, the machines and the gaming systems have to be sure that they report and track revenue so that we can get back to collecting the right amount of tax.
A big thank you to our guests and to all of our listeners for tuning in. Before we wrap up, here are a couple of important reminders. To earn continuing legal education credit, remember to complete a certificate of attendance and email it to jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov. If you have any questions, topic suggestions, or comments, we value your input. Please email them to jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov. We value and look forward to hearing from our listeners. Stay tuned for more episodes of I'll Allow It Nevada, released every first and third Friday of the month. This is Seth Easley signing off. Take care, Nevada.